For a long time, I thought procrastination was a personal flaw, a lack of discipline, a bad habit, something I needed to overcome or outgrow. That idea sounds sensible. It fits neatly into the way that we're taught to think about productivity. If something isn't moving, apply pressure. If it still doesn't move, apply more. But here's what is never quite added up for me. Procrastination doesn't usually show up where people are incapable. It shows up where people are thoughtful, imaginative, and sensitive to meaning. It visits people who care, which immediately makes it less interesting to frame as laziness. Because if it were laziness, it wouldn't be so selective. What I began to notice is that people don't procrastinate on meaningless things. They procrastinate on the things that carry weight, the things that quietly ask us to show up differently than we have before. And that made me wonder whether procrastination isn't really about time at all, but about thresholds.
Yes, and I think that's where the conversation usually goes wrong. Most advice assumes there's one you inside, one decision maker, and that procrastination is a failure of will. But lived experience feels very different. It feels more like an internal negotiation. There's a part of us that can see far ahead. It understands consequence, coherence, long arcs. It's patient and it doesn't panic. And then there's another ancient part that lives very close to the present moment. It cares less about meaning and more about comfort, relief, and not feeling strained or exposed right now. It evolved to keep the organism safe in immediate physical ways, and is very good at its job. The problem is that modern life asks it to care about things it was never designed to understand. Delayed rewards, abstract futures, identity shifts. So when something meaningful is about to begin, that part negotiates.
And it negotiates in a very particular way. Rather than saying, never do this, it says, we will do this later. And as you know, later can be incredibly persuasive. It sounds reasonable and mature, like you're giving the idea proper space, but later can quietly become a holding pattern, one that feels safe because nothing is technically wrong. And that's why procrastination often doesn't look like doing nothing. It looks more like doing almost something, researching, preparing, tidying, consuming adjacent information. You're active, just not exposed. And there's a strange emotional quality to that state. You're not relaxed, but you're not fully stressed either. You're hovering. I once heard someone call it the waiting room of life, and that phrase struck with me. Because waiting rooms are designed for delay. They're neutral. You're not meant to live there, just not meant to leave yet either. Procrastination thrives in that neutrality.
There's a moment in an old film, Bull Durham, that captures this perfectly. The character stands at the edge of a swimming pool, dipping a toe into the water again and again, talking about how cold it is. Finally, someone says, you'll be cold in for 5 seconds, or you can be uncomfortable for the rest of the day. It's played as a joke, but it's very accurate. Procrastination isn't usually about avoiding pain. It's about avoiding brief discomfort and choosing a longer, quieter unease instead. The longer unease feels familiar. Familiarity, like safety, is persuasive. That's why deadlines change everything. Introduce a clear consequence and suddenly energy appears. Pressure works. It just isn't spacious.
Which raises a question that rarely gets asked. What happens in the areas of life where there aren't deadlines? There's no due date for honesty, no final warning for staying half aligned, no calendar reminder for the moment when something inside you quietly says, This isn't it anymore. History gives us a useful parallel here. The Roman Empire didn't collapse in a single dramatic moment. It thinned. Roads went unrepaired. Systems were patched instead of renewed. Decisions were delayed because they felt inconvenient or uncomfortable. Each delay made sense in its own, but collectively they hollowed the structure out. And that's procrastination without a deadline. Rather than immediate dramatic failure, it causes erosion. People experience this internally all the time without realizing that that's what's happening.
Exactly. Most people don't think they're procrastinating on life. They think they're being sensible, careful, and patient, seeing themselves as waiting for clarity, confidence, or the right conditions. Sometimes they are, but often they're waiting for permission that never comes. This is where procrastination stops being funny because it isn't about missed tasks anymore. It's about postponed selves. People don't wake up and abandon themselves. They delay small things such as conversations and creative impulses, the very changes that would require them to see themselves differently. Each delay seems justified and minor, until one day, looking back, there's a sense of having been present for your own life, but not fully inside it. That's a very particular kind of regret.
There's a brief but telling example of this in the life of Franz Kafka. He was a quiet insurance clerk who wrote unsettling, extraordinary stories at night. Two of them were The Metamorphosis and The Trial. He believed they were unfinished and unworthy and asked for most of his work to be burned after his death. Although he was committed to writing, letting what mattered most to him fully exist in the world felt unbearable. Kafka's hesitation wasn't about effort or talent. It lived at the threshold between inner truth and outer exposure. Procrastination often lives right there too, because caring opens something.
Starting something meaningful isn't just work. It's a declaration that says, this matters to me. And once you've said that, others can see your changes, successes, and failures. Staying adjacent to your life is safer than stepping fully inside it. Which is why shaming procrastination never works. You can't bully a protective mechanism into trust. The part of you that delays isn't trying to sabotage your future, it's trying to keep you comfortable in the present. What softens procrastination's grip isn't force. It's a curiosity that simply notices patterns without demanding immediate action.
Notice how often later becomes a loop, how preparation replaces participation, and how the things you delay are often the things that will quietly reshape how you see yourself. It's curious that procrastination is less about avoiding effort and more about avoiding identity shifts. That changes the question. Instead of asking, why can't I just get on with it? A more interesting question might be, what am I unwilling to feel if I begin? That question doesn't demand an answer or a movement. It just asks to be noticed. And noticing, real noticing, tends to arrive earlier than action ever did.
And sometimes that is enough. Once you see the pattern, really see it, you're no longer completely asleep at the wheel. Awareness shows up without urgency or drama and just soon enough to matter. Maybe procrastination was never pointing to a flaw to fix or a habit to conquer. Maybe it was always pointing to a threshold you keep walking around. Waiting patiently because some part of you knows that stepping through changes things. And change deserves a moment of recognition. No rush. Just honesty about where you're still standing.
Before we close, if this conversation stayed with you, even quietly, you're welcome to let us know. A like helps this reach the people who might be circling the same questions. Sharing it does the same. And if you'd like to continue these kinds of conversations with us, you can subscribe and turn on notifications so that you don't miss what comes next. No pressure, just an open invitation. Until next time, think differently, dream boldly, and create consciously.
I'm a quiet